All right, bringing you recent developments in Africa, it has it that a justice opened an investigation on Monday following clashes between irregular migrants from the sub-Saharan Africa and residents of Spask, Tunisia's second city where illegal immigration has been causing great tensions for months. These clashes with stone throwing pitted migrants against residents of the Rand district. Spokesman for the Sfax prosecutor's office, Fauzi Masmoudi, told AFP. Vehicles and homes were damaged during the clashes, which caused no casualties. Masmoudi reported this. An investigation had been opened to determine those responsible and the causes of this violence, he added. According to local media, the police intervened by using tear gas to put an end to the clashes.
Well, Express in East Central Tunisia is a starting point for a large number of illegal crossings to Italy. Its inhabitants regularly protest against the presence of irregular migrants in their city and demands their departure. In the popular neighborhoods of the city where the migrants live, verbal and physical violence often breaks out between the two parties. The violence increased after a speech on the 21st of February by President Kais Saied slamming irregular immigration and presenting it as a demographic threat to his country.
Now, several local and international NGOs denounced the hate speech and intimidation against migrants from sub-Saharan Africa, broadcast on social network, which contributes to the mobilization against the most vulnerable groups and fuel violent behaviors against them. At the end of May, a 30-year-old Beninese migrant was fatally stabbed during an attack carried out by a group of young Tunisians in a working class neighborhood in Spask. Most migrants from sub Saharan Africa come to Tunisia to then try to reach Europe by sea, landing clandestinely on the Italian coast. Speaking of the perils migrants face, we have Egyptians who, on the other hand, dream of Europe when they set sail in the Mediterranean Sea but risk their lives in the process.
Fleeing poverty and repression with no plans for the future, more and more Egyptians are trying to reach Europe, often risking their lives, like the dozens caught in the recent shipwreck in Greece. All right. Meanwhile, I spoke to my son for the last time on the evening of 7 June. He told me he was leaving. 2 days later, told AFP the father of a 14-year-old boy who disappeared when a dilapidated and overloaded trawler sank off the Philippines on the night of 13 to 14 June. All right. And this is what a father had to say.
Well, in the village of Namna in the Nile Delta alone, the NGO Refugees Platform in Egypt, the RPE, has recorded 13 missing persons, including 9 minors. According to the authorities, 43 Egyptians survived. RPE, for its part, has received dozens of calls from families still without news in 2 villages in the province of Al Sharqiya. Alone, there were more than 40 families.
So far, 82 bodies have been removed and recovered from the waters following this shipwreck, probably one of the worst in the Mediterranean Sea. However, according to the UN, between 400 and 750 passengers were on board the trawler, including women and children. Now, according to director of RPE, he said, "We don't know how many Egyptians were on board, and the authorities have not announced the number of the missing Egyptians yet."
Well, only a talk show host close to the regime ventured to give a figure. According to him, 200 Egyptians were on board. The father of the young man who disappeared is still waiting for news. Uh, we went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to take a DNA sample, he told AFP, but unfortunately said that they don't know anything and that nobody is keeping them informed.
Between January and May, Frontex, the European border agency, recorded 50,300 arrivals of migrants in Europe via the central Mediterranean Sea, the most dangerous migratory route in the world. Others have undoubtedly landed but have not been spotted. In 2022, 1 in 5 migrants arriving in Italy was Egyptian, according to the European Union Asylum Agency. According to Rome, Egyptians are the largest group of arrivals in Italy, accounting for a third of all unaccompanied minors. Most of them, as the EUAA, are trying to reach Italy from Libya to escape the worst economic crisis in Egypt's history, but also the human rights situation, catastrophic under President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, which is according to the NGOs.
Now, Cairo regularly represents itself as an anti illegal immigration champion, demanding ever more funds from the Europeans. In June, French President Emmanuel Macron hailed an essential partner of the European Union in the fight against illegal immigration, according to the Egyptian presidency. Since 2016, no migrant boats have left the Egyptian coast. In August 2022, the European Commission announced that it will provide Egypt with a further 80 million euros in particular to finance the surveillance of land and sea borders. But for Mr. Khalil, the militarization of the borders is not a solution. It has merely shifted the problem as Egyptians are now taken to the sea from Libya. In Libya, the UN regularly denounces the massive arbitrary detentions of thousands of migrant men, women, and children rounded up in the streets or in their homes.
At the beginning of June, Libyan media even relayed unauthenticated videos showing nearly 1,000 Egyptians being expelled and forced to cross the border on foot. Well, the NGOs have no access to these militarized areas, says Mr. Kali. He says the penalties for smugglers are increasingly severe. But all these barriers have not stopped the 13 Egyptians from the Neman village from leaving, because as long as the new generation has no prospects for the future and no opportunity to make its voice heard, the departures will continue, he asserts.
Well, nine of them were under 18 because the profile of Egyptian migrants has changed. Mr. Kali explains that before they go to Europe to work for a few years, save up and return to Egypt to set up a small business. Today, he says the new generation they don't want to come back to Egypt because they think they have no future there. Well, fact has it that African migration has been on a steady upward trajectory for the past 2 decades. The record level of over 40 million African migrants represents a 30% increase from 2010, given continuing strong push factors, and as is obvious, the trend has continued even onto this year. Year after year, African migrants wound up in Morocco as the route to Europe. The Cameroon, Southern Cameroons, and French Cameroon, Ivorians, Malians on the streets of Casablanca's Olaf neighborhood seems as if the whole of Africa comes together. For many migrants, the Moroccan city is a stop and route to Europe and represents the dream of a better life.
Since the 17th of June 2022, reports has it that families are arrested at home in the middle of the night, herded into bushes, and then abandoned to their fate in towns in the middle of the desert. These members of the sub-Saharan African community living in Morocco have been frightened by the wave of arrests targeted migrants in the Lyon, a town known as a departure point for people hoping to reach Spain's Canary Islands. Most of the people targeted in these raids are from the Ivory Coast, the Cameroons, the Southern Cameroons especially, Mali or Togo.
Well, Hassan Amari, an activist with the Moroccan Association for Human Rights, known by the acronym AMDH, who closely followed the situation, told that the police did not carry out arrests according to code because they were entering people's apartments without a warrant issued by a judge. Several people reported that after being arrested, they were locked up for several days in a filthy detention center on the outskirts of Lyon. Some were then herded into buses and brought to other regions, often in the desert near the Algerian border.
Well, we've seen minors fleeing Egypt unaccompanied. We've seen Amazonians in their cars to be free from the wars happening in their homeland end up stuck in huge numbers on inflatable boats at the mercy of whatever left they believe in. We have also seen Southern Cameroonians, amongst other sub Saharan migrants, who get beat up in Morocco terribly and forced to sign the voluntary deportation documents, thereby forfeiting the rights to asylum. And that's not all, but so many extreme cases, too numerous to mention, just to be away from the troubles of their countries and hope to find a better future in foreign countries. It's certain that if they could find talents and a future in their respective countries, none of these victims and migrants would take such risks, which even ends their lives on many occasions.
Well, the big mystery question is how and when can these be achieved in their homelands?